The cemetery stretched before me like a gray wound against the earth, endless rows of stone markers disappearing into the morning mist. My breath formed small clouds in the frigid air, each exhale a visible reminder that I was still here, still breathing, while he was not. The scent of damp soil and decaying leaves filled my nostrils, mixing with the faint perfume of the white roses I clutched against my chest. His favorite, though few knew that about him. I had been coming here every dawn for 3 months. The pack thought I was pathetic. I could feel their judgment like needle pricks against my skin whenever I passed through the settlement on my way to this place. A lowly Omega mourning the Lycan king as if she had any right to grieve him, as if my sorrow mattered in the grand scheme of his legacy. The whispers followed me everywhere. She's lost her mind. She barely knew him. It's unseemly. Omegas don't mourn alphas like that. But they didn't understand. They couldn't. My pale blonde hair whipped across my face as a cold wind swept through the graveyard, and I tucked the strands behind my ear with trembling fingers. The simple gray dress I wore offered little protection against the elements, but I barely noticed the cold anymore. Physical discomfort had become background noise to the ache that lived permanently in my chest. His grave stood apart from the others, as befitted a king. The stone was obsidian black, polished to a mirror shine, with his name carved in silver letters that caught what little light filtered through the clouds. Demon Silvercrest, Lycan King, Protector of the Realm. Beneath it, the dates of his too short life, and a single line. He bore the weight so others could stand tall. I knelt in the wet grass, ignoring how the moisture immediately soaked through my dress. Setting the roses at the base of the headstone, I traced his name with my fingertips, the way I had done countless times before. "I brought your favorites again," I whispered, my voice hoarse from disuse. I rarely spoke to anyone but him these days. "The florist thinks I'm buying them for a lover." I didn't correct her. Easier than explaining that I'm talking to a dead king who probably never knew my name. A bitter laugh escaped my throat, echoing too loud in the quiet morning. Somewhere in the distance, a crow cawed, and I shivered. Not from cold, but from the sudden sensation that I wasn't alone. I glanced around the cemetery, scanning the shadows between the mausoleums and the ancient oak trees that bordered the grounds, but saw nothing. Just the mist and the stones and my own foolish imagination. I turned back to the grave, my fingers curling into fists against my thighs. "They're planning your memorial statue for the Capitol Square next month," I continued softly. "Bronze, 12 feet tall, showing you in battle stance with your sword raised. Very heroic. Very impersonal. They want everyone to remember you as the warrior king, the undefeated alpha who expanded the territory and crushed our enemies." My throat tightened, and I had to pause, blinking back the burn of tears. "But I remember you differently. I remember the way you stood in the rain during the Harvest Festival last year, letting the children climb on your shoulders to see the fireworks. I remember how you stopped to help old Thomas fix his wagon wheel, even though you had a council meeting. I remember—" My voice broke completely. I remembered the only time he had ever spoken directly to me. It had been 6 months ago, during the worst period of my life. I had just lost my parents to a rogue attack, and the pack's charity toward a grieving Omega had worn thin quickly. I was working 3 jobs just to keep my tiny cottage at the edge of the settlement, exhausted and hollow, and trying desperately not to disappear entirely. I had been carrying firewood through the market square, my arms overloaded, my vision obscured by the stack of logs. I didn't see the group of alpha males until I collided with one of them, sending wood clattering across the cobblestones. "Stupid Omega!" one of them had snarled, raising his hand. I had flinched, bracing for the blow, when a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Touch her, and you'll lose that hand." The Lycan King himself had stepped between us, his massive frame blocking out the sun. I had looked up at him, way up as he stood nearly 7 feet tall, and found his eyes on me. They were silver gray, like storm clouds, and in them I saw something I hadn't expected. Recognition of pain. He understood suffering, loneliness, the weight of being different. "Are you hurt?" he had asked me, his voice gentler than I'd ever heard it in public addresses. I had shaken my head, too shocked to speak. He had helped me gather the firewood, despite protests from his beta, despite the stares from the crowd. When every piece was collected, he had looked at me again with those devastating eyes and said, "Strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just continuing when everything tells you to stop." Then he had walked away, and I had stood there in the market square with my arms full of wood and my heart full of something I couldn't name. I never spoke to him again. 3 months later, he was dead. Killed, they said, in a border skirmish with a rival pack. His body had been recovered by his inner circle and brought back for a king's burial. The entire realm had mourned, but none of them mourned like I did. None of them knew what it meant to be seen by someone who lived invisible. "I miss you," I whispered to the headstone now, pressing my palm flat against the cold stone. "I know I don't have the right. I know you were a king and I'm nobody. But I miss knowing you're out there somewhere, making the world a little less cruel just by existing in it." The wind picked up again, stronger this time, carrying with it the scent of pine and something else. Something wild and alive that seemed out of place in this garden of death. That feeling of being watched intensified, prickling down my spine like phantom claws. I turned sharply, my heart suddenly racing. Nothing. Just mist and shadows and the early morning gloom. But my wolf stirred inside me for the first time in months, her awareness sharpening in a way she hadn't done since he died. She was the weakest wolf in the pack, barely able to shift. More liability than asset. Yet now she was alert, almost hopeful. "Hello?" I called out, my voice stronger than I felt. "Is someone there?" Silence answered me, heavy and expectant. I stood slowly, brushing wet grass from my dress, my eyes scanning the tree line. The cemetery bordered the wild forest on one side, and anything could be lurking in those shadows. Rogues, rival pack scouts, or just my grief-addled mind conjuring phantoms. I should leave. The sun was rising higher now, and I had to get to my job at the textile mill. The foreman didn't care about my morning rituals, and I couldn't afford to lose another position. But something held me there, rooted to the spot beside Demon's grave. "I'll come back tomorrow," I promised, speaking to the headstone but feeling like the words were meant for something else. Someone else. I always do. As I turned to leave, I caught a flash of movement in my peripheral vision. A figure standing between two mausoleums about 50 yards away, perfectly still, watching me. My breath caught in my throat. The figure was tall, powerfully built, wrapped in a dark cloak that obscured their features. But even from this distance, even through the mist, I could feel the intensity of their gaze boring into me like a physical touch. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but I found myself frozen, staring back at the mysterious watcher. Then, as suddenly as I'd noticed them, they stepped backward into the shadow of the mausoleum and vanished. I stood there for a long moment, my heart hammering against my ribs, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Grief did strange things to the mind. Maybe I was finally losing my grip on reality, seeing things that weren't there, letting my loneliness manifest into phantoms. But my wolf didn't think it was my imagination. She was pacing inside me, agitated and strangely excited, pushing against my consciousness with an urgency I didn't understand. I forced myself to move, walking quickly toward the cemetery gates, glancing over my shoulder every few steps. The walk back to the settlement felt longer than usual, and I couldn't shake the sensation of eyes on my back the entire way. When I finally reached the safety of the crowded market square, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. "You're late again, Alara," my supervisor, Margaret, said sharply when I arrived at the mill. "That's the 3rd time this week." "I'm sorry," I murmured, tying my hair back and moving to my station at the loom. Margaret's expression softened slightly. She was one of the few who didn't openly mock my grief. "Still going to the cemetery?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "It's not healthy, girl. He's gone. The dead don't need our tears. The living do." She meant well, but she didn't understand. Those morning visits were the only thing keeping me tethered to the world. Without them, I might drift away entirely, becoming as ghostly as the figure I'd seen among the graves. I worked mechanically through the day, my hands moving through familiar motions while my mind churned, Who had been watching me? And why did their presence make my wolf react so strongly? By the time I returned to my cottage that evening, exhausted and covered in lint, I had almost convinced myself it was nothing. My imagination, shadows and mist, grief playing tricks. But when I pushed open my door, I stopped dead. On my small wooden table sat a single white rose in a glass of water, the same type I had left on Demon's grave that morning. My hands began to shake. I lived alone. No one visited me. I had locked the door when I left. I always did. I approached the rose slowly, as if it might bite. There was no note, no explanation, just the perfect white bloom sitting innocently on my table like an impossible question. Someone had been in my home, someone who knew where I went each morning. Someone who was sending me a message I didn't yet understand. I picked up the rose with trembling fingers, bringing it close to my face. It smelled exactly like the ones from this morning, but underneath that floral sweetness was another scent, faint but unmistakable. Pine and wilderness and something wild, the same scent I'd caught on the wind at the cemetery. My wolf surged forward with such force that I gasped, and for just a moment I could have sworn I heard a voice in my mind, deep, male, achingly familiar, whisper a single word, soon. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my table with the mysterious rose in front of me, watching the shadows shift across my walls as the moon moved through the sky. Every creak of the old cottage made me jump. Every whisper of wind against the windows set my heart racing. Someone had been inside my home. Someone was watching me, and the rational part of my brain insisted I should be terrified, should report this to the pack enforcers, should barricade myself inside and never visit that cemetery again. But my wolf wouldn't let me rest, pacing and whining and pushing against my consciousness, with an insistence that felt almost like anticipation. It made no sense. When dawn finally broke, painting my small window with weak gray light, I was already dressed and ready. I hadn't even questioned whether I would go to the cemetery again. My feet were carrying me there before conscious thought could intervene. The market square was empty this early, just a few vendors setting up their stalls. Old Thomas waved at me from his usual corner where he sold vegetables, his weathered face creasing into a sympathetic smile. He'd been kind to me since my parents died, often slipping an extra potato or carrot into my purchases without charging. "Off to see him again?" he called softly. I nodded, unable to meet his eyes. "You've got a good heart, Alara," he said. "Don't let anyone tell you different. The king would have appreciated your loyalty." I murmured my thanks and hurried on, my pulse quickening with each step that brought me closer to the cemetery gates. The mist was thicker this morning, rolling between the headstones like something alive. I could barely see 10 feet in front of me as I made my way along the familiar path to Demon's grave. The white roses from yesterday were still there, already beginning to wilt, their petals browning at the edges. I knelt in my usual spot, pulling fresh flowers from the cloth bag I carried. My hands shook slightly as I arranged them, and I couldn't stop my eyes from darting to the shadows, searching for that tall figure I'd seen yesterday. "I'm either losing my mind or something impossible is happening," I said quietly to the headstone. "Someone broke into my cottage, left me one of these roses, and I should be afraid, but I'm not. My wolf, she thinks she knows something I don't." I pressed my palm against the cold obsidian, closing my eyes. "I wish you were here. You'd know what to do. You always seem to know everything, like you could see straight through to the truth of things. That day in the market square, you looked at me like you understood exactly what it felt like to be alone." The single word came from directly behind me, and I spun so fast I nearly fell backward into the grave. He stood there, the cloaked figure from yesterday, but closer now. Close enough that I could see he was enormous, easily matching Demon's height and build. The hood of his cloak shadowed his face completely, leaving only darkness where features should be. But I could feel his eyes on me, intense and burning, studying me with an attention that made my skin flush hot despite the cold morning air. My wolf went absolutely wild inside me, throwing herself against my mental walls, trying desperately to push forward. I had never felt her react like this. Not even during the full moon runs when instinct took over. "Who are you?" I managed, my voice coming out steadier than I felt. I didn't run, didn't scream. Something told me running would be pointless, and screaming would bring no help in time. The figure didn't move, didn't speak again, just stood there, watching me with that terrible, wonderful intensity. "Did you break into my home?" I demanded, finding courage I didn't know I possessed. Maybe it was being at Demon's grave that made me brave. Maybe it was the months of grief teaching me that there were worse things than death. "Did you leave that rose?" Still silence, but I saw his hands clench at his sides, the movement making his cloak shift enough that I caught a glimpse of his build beneath. Pure muscle and power. A warrior's body. "If you're going to hurt me, just do it," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of everything." That made him move. He took a single step forward, and I heard the sharp intake of his breath, as if my words had physically struck him. "I would never," he started, and his voice cut off abruptly, like he'd revealed too much. But it was enough. That voice, even those 3 words, resonated through me like a bell, deep and commanding and edged with something that sounded like anguish. It stirred memories I couldn't quite grasp, feelings I couldn't name. "Then what do you want?" I asked, standing slowly, facing him despite my trembling legs. "Why are you following me? Why the rose?" He stood perfectly still for a long moment, and I could feel the war happening inside him, the struggle between speaking and staying silent. When he finally moved, it was to reach into his cloak and pull something out. Another white rose, pristine and perfect. He held it out to me, his hand large and scarred. The first part of him I could see clearly. I stared at the rose, then at his shadowed face, then back at the flower. "I don't understand," I whispered. "You come here every morning," he said, his voice rough, like he wasn't used to speaking. "Rain or shine. When the snow fell last week and the paths were impassable, you still came. When you were sick with fever 2 weeks ago, you still came." My heart stopped. "You've been watching me for weeks?" "Longer." The single word carried the weight of confession. "Why?" My voice cracked on the question. He lowered the rose slightly, and I saw his hand shaking, this powerful figure, trembling like I was. "Because I don't understand. No one comes here. No one mourns him like this. You're Omega, barely 20 years old, working yourself to exhaustion at 3 jobs just to survive. You have no obligation to this grave, no connection to the king that anyone knows of. Yet you bring roses. You talk to him. You cry for him." Each statement felt like an accusation and a question all at once. I started, then stopped. How could I explain? He was kind to me once, just once. And in a world where no one sees you, where you might as well be invisible, one moment of kindness from someone who didn't have to give it, it matters. It changes everything. The figure went very, very still. "One moment," he repeated, and something in his tone made my chest ache. "One brief exchange in a market square, and you mourn him like you lost everything?" "I did lose everything," I said, surprised by my own honesty. "When he died, I lost the only proof I had that someone like me could matter to someone like him. I lost the hope that maybe, somewhere in this cruel world, there was still goodness, still mercy." I saw his chest rise and fall with a sharp breath, like I'd wounded him. "You didn't even know him," he said, but it sounded like he was trying to convince himself more than me. I knew enough. I knew he helped an Omega gather firewood when he could have walked past. I knew he threatened an Alpha for raising his hand to someone powerless. I knew that for 30 seconds of my life, I felt like I existed, like I mattered. My voice broke on the last word, and tears I'd been fighting spilled down my cheeks. "That's why I come here. Not because I think he loved me or even remembered me, but because I need to remember that moment happened, that it was real, that I wasn't always this invisible." The figure made a sound, something between a growl and a groan, and suddenly he was closer, moving with speed that should have been impossible for someone his size. He stopped just inches from me, and I could feel the heat radiating from his body, smell that pine and wilderness scent that had haunted me since yesterday. "You are not invisible," he said fiercely, and I felt the words as much as heard them. "You have never been invisible." I looked up at him, at the shadowed space where his face should be, and my wolf was screaming now, throwing herself against my consciousness with such force that I gasped. "Who are you?" I whispered again, but this time it wasn't a demand, it was a plea. His hand, still holding the rose, lifted slowly toward my face. I should have backed away, should have been terrified, but I stood frozen as his fingers, gentle despite their obvious strength, brushed a tear from my cheek. The touch sent electricity through my entire body, and my wolf surged forward with such force that I half-shifted involuntarily, my eyes flashing to their wolf gold, my nails extending to claws. And in that moment of connection, of skin against skin, I felt it. The bond. Not just any bond, but the bond. The one wolves spent their whole lives searching for, the one that marked true mates, the one that was supposed to be impossible for an Omega like me to ever find. "No," I breathed, stumbling backward. "That's not... You can't be..." But he was already moving, pulling back, shoving the rose into my hands and stepping away like I'd burned him. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice wrecked. "I shouldn't have come. I shouldn't have..." He turned away, shoulders rigid with tension. "Wait!" I called out, clutching the rose so hard the thorns bit into my palm. "Please, I don't understand what's happening." He paused, his back to me, and I could see how tightly he was holding himself, like one wrong move might shatter his control completely. "The king you mourn," he said quietly, each word seeming to cost him. "Tell me what you would say to him if he could hear you. If he was standing right here, alive, what would you tell him?" The question caught me off guard, scattering my thoughts. I looked at the grave, at the obsidian headstone with Demon's name carved in silver, and felt the familiar ache in my chest. I would tell him that his kindness saved my life. That day in the market square, I had been planning to leave, to go rogue, to disappear into the forest and let the wildness take me because I couldn't bear being invisible anymore. But he saw me. He spoke to me like I was worth speaking to, and I thought, if someone like him could exist in this world, maybe there was a reason to stay. I wiped my eyes with my free hand. The rose clutched against my heart. I would tell him thank you, and I'm sorry I never got to say it when he was alive. I'm sorry he died thinking no one really knew him. Because I think under all that power and authority, he was lonely too. I think he understood what it felt like to be surrounded by people and still completely alone, and I would tell him that I wish I could have been brave enough to speak to him again, to maybe be a friend when he needed one, to show him the same kindness he showed me. My voice dropped to barely a whisper. And I would tell him that I dream about him sometimes, about what might have been possible if the world were different, if I were different. If he were just a man and I were just a woman, instead of a king and an Omega with nothing to offer. The silence that followed was deafening. The cloaked figure's shoulders shook, and I heard him draw a ragged breath. "He heard you," he said, so quietly I almost missed it. Every word. Every morning. He's been listening. Before I could process what that meant, before I could ask the 1,000 questions suddenly flooding my mind, he shifted. And I do mean shifted. His form blurred and changed, and suddenly a massive silver-gray wolf stood where the man had been, his cloak pooled on the ground around his paws. The wolf was enormous, easily twice the size of any I'd ever seen, with fur that caught the morning light like liquid metal, and eyes that were hauntingly familiar. Storm-gray eyes that I had seen only once before, in a market square 6 months ago. My rose fell from my nerveless fingers. The wolf looked at me one last time with those impossible eyes, and then he turned and vanished into the mist, moving like smoke and shadow, leaving me standing alone beside a grave that suddenly felt like the biggest lie I'd ever believed. I ran, not away from the cemetery, but toward the settlement, my feet pounding against the dirt path, my breath coming in ragged gasps that had nothing to do with exertion and everything to do with the impossibility of what I'd just witnessed. The rose I'd dropped lay forgotten on the ground beside a grave that held either a body or a lie, and I couldn't process which option terrified me more. Those eyes. Those storm-gray eyes that had haunted my dreams for 6 months. Demon Silvercrest was dead. I had attended his funeral, The entire realm had mourned. His body had been recovered, prepared, buried with all the ceremony befitting a Lycan king. There were witnesses. There were records. There was a corpse in that obsidian coffin beneath the earth, wasn't there? I burst through the door of my cottage and collapsed against it, sliding down to the floor as my legs finally gave out. My wolf was in chaos, howling and celebrating and utterly convinced of something my human mind refused to accept. She had recognized him. She had known from the first moment in the cemetery, maybe even before that, when the mysterious rose appeared on my table. Our mate was alive, but that meant everything else was a lie. I pressed my hands against my face, trying to force my thoughts into some kind of order. If Demon was alive, why fake his death? Why let the entire realm believe their king had fallen? Why hide in shadows and watch me mourn him every morning for 3 months instead of revealing himself? And why, after all this time, show himself to me, a nobody, an omega with no power, no status, no relevance to the political machinations of the Lycan throne? A knock at my door made me jump so violently I hit my head against the wood. "Ilara? You in there, girl?" It was Margaret's voice, sharp with concern. "You never showed up for your shift. That's not like you, even with all your cemetery nonsense." I forced myself to stand, smoothing my dress and trying to arrange my face into something resembling normal. When I opened the door, Margaret's eyes widened. "Saints above, you look like you've seen a ghost." The irony of that statement almost made me laugh, but I swallowed it down. "I'm not feeling well. I think I need to rest." Margaret studied me with the shrewd gaze of someone who'd raised 6 children and could spot a lie at 50 paces. "This about the king again?" "Everything's about the king," I muttered, before I could stop myself. Her expression softened into something like pity. "Ilara, honey, I know you're grieving, but you can't keep living like this. He's gone. You need to let him rest and start living your own life." If only she knew how complicated that statement had just become. "I will," I lied. "I just need a few days." Margaret didn't look convinced, but she nodded. "I'll tell the foreman you're sick, but Ilara, you can't afford to lose this job. I can only cover for you so long." I thanked her and closed the door, leaning against it again as her footsteps faded. She was right about one thing. I couldn't afford to lose my job. I was barely surviving as it was, and without the income from the mill, I'd be homeless within a month. But how was I supposed to go back to normal life when nothing was normal anymore? I spent the rest of that day pacing my small cottage, alternating between convincing myself I'd hallucinated the entire encounter and replaying every detail with crystalline clarity. The way he'd moved, the way he'd spoken, the way my wolf had reacted to his presence like she'd found the other half of her soul. The mate bond didn't lie. It couldn't. It was the one thing in our world that was absolute, undeniable, written into the very fabric of what we were. But if Demon Silvercrest was my mate, why had I never felt it before? That day in the market square, I'd felt something. Recognition, connection, a pull I couldn't name. But not the full force of the bond, not this overwhelming certainty that my wolf was experiencing now. Unless he'd been blocking it somehow, hiding it from me, from everyone. But why? Night fell, and I still had no answers. I lit a candle and sat at my table, staring at the single white rose from yesterday that still sat in its glass of water. It hadn't wilted at all, remaining as fresh as the moment it appeared. Magic, maybe, or just another impossibility in a day full of them. When the knock came at my door near midnight, I wasn't surprised. I opened it without hesitation, without fear, because my wolf knew who stood on the other side. He was there in human form this time, the hood of his cloak still shadowing his face. But I could see more of him now in the candlelight spilling from my doorway. Strong jaw, shadowed with stubble, lips pressed into a tight line. The powerful column of his throat disappearing into the dark fabric of his cloak. "May I come in?" His voice was rough, like he'd been silent for hours, wrestling with the decision to come here. I stepped aside, and he entered my small cottage, his presence immediately making the space feel tiny. He had to duck under the doorframe, and when he straightened, His head nearly touched the low ceiling. I closed the door and turned to face him, my heart hammering. "Show me," I said, not a request, a demand. His hands lifted to his hood, hesitating there for a long moment. I could see them shaking. "If I do this," he said quietly, "everything changes. You can never unknow what you're about to learn. And the truth, it's dangerous, Alara. Knowing it puts you at risk. I'm already at risk," I countered. "You've seen to that by revealing yourself. So either show me your face and explain what's happening, or leave and never come back. But don't stand in my home and keep hiding." A sound escaped him that might have been a laugh or a sob. "You're braver than you know." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "But I'm tired of being kept in the dark." He pulled the hood back slowly, revealing his face inch by inch. And even though I'd already guessed, even though my wolf had been screaming the truth at me all day, seeing him still stole the breath from my lungs. Demon Silvercrest stood in my cottage, alive and whole, watching me with those storm-gray eyes that had haunted me for months. He looked different than I remembered, thinner, with shadows under his eyes and new scars crossing his face. His dark hair was longer, wilder, and there was a tension in his shoulders that spoke of months carrying an unbearable weight. But it was unmistakably him. "Hello, Alara," he said softly. "I'm sorry it took me so long to stop hiding." I couldn't speak, couldn't move, could only stare at him while my mind tried to reconcile the corpse in the cemetery with the living man before me. "The grave," I finally managed. "The funeral. What's in that coffin?" "A very convincing fake," he said. "Created by a witch who owed me a favor. It would fool even the most sophisticated magical examination. As far as the world knows, Demon Silvercrest died 3 months ago in a border skirmish. Why?" The word came out as barely a whisper. He moved to my table, pulling out a chair and sitting down heavily, like he'd been standing for days. "May I?" I nodded, still frozen by the door. "There's a conspiracy," he began, his voice low and controlled, though I could hear the anger simmering beneath. "Within my own council, my own inner circle, someone, possibly several someones, has been working to undermine my rule for years, selling information to enemy packs, sabotaging trade agreements, even attempting assassination twice that I know of." He looked up at me, and the pain in his eyes was staggering. "I couldn't find the traitor. Every investigation led nowhere. They were too careful, too protected by layers of loyal wolves who had no idea they were being used, so I did the only thing I could think of. I died." "You faked your death to catch a traitor," I said slowly, trying to understand, not just to catch them, to expose the entire network. When a king dies, power shifts. Alliances reform. People reveal their true loyalties when they think the game has changed. He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture so achingly familiar from the few times I'd seen him in public that my chest hurt. "My beta Rafe is the only one who knows the truth. He's been feeding me information, watching who moves into position, who reaches for power, who suddenly has resources they shouldn't have. And?" I prompted when he fell silent. "And we're close. So close to identifying the key players. But it's been 3 months of living in the shadows, watching my realm struggle without visible leadership, seeing the suffering my absence causes," his jaw clenched, "knowing I can't reveal myself until we have proof solid enough that even the council can't dismiss it. I process this slowly, pieces falling into place. That's why you've been at the cemetery, watching, making sure no one suspects." "Partially." He looked away, and I saw color rise in his cheeks, actually saw the Lycan King blush. "At first, yes. I would go there sometimes, checking that the grave was undisturbed, that the illusion held. But then you started coming." My breath caught. "The first morning I saw you, I thought you were just another curious citizen paying respects. But you came back the next day, and the day after that, and you brought roses, white roses, which no one should have known were my favorite because I never told anyone that small detail." He finally met my eyes again. "You spoke to me, to my grave. You said things that that broke something in me and healed something else at the same time. I didn't know you could hear, I whispered. I couldn't, not at first. But I kept coming back, staying in the shadows, and I started timing my visits to yours. I told myself it was reconnaissance, making sure you weren't a spy or a threat, but the truth is, I was drawn to you. Your grief was so honest, so pure. You mourned me like I actually mattered. Not as a king, but as a person. He stood abruptly, moving closer, and I saw the raw emotion on his face. Do you know what that's like? To spend your entire life being valued only for what you can do, what power you wield, what protection you provide, and then to hear someone mourn you simply because you were kind once? Simply because you saw them. I did see you, I said, finding my voice. In the market square that day, I saw you seeing me, and it changed everything. It changed everything for me too, he admitted. I couldn't stop thinking about you afterward. This Omega with pale blonde hair and eyes that held oceans of quiet strength. I wanted to speak to you again, but I was the king. And you were... nobody, I finished. Someone, he corrected fiercely. Someone real in a world of masks and politics, and people who only showed me what they thought I wanted to see. You were genuine. And after I died, hearing you grieve me, learning your name, watching you sacrifice your own well-being to bring me flowers every single day, Alara, you became the only real thing in my entire false existence. The mate bond hummed between us, growing stronger with every word, every moment of honesty. When did you know? I asked. About the bond? His expression turned tortured. The market square. The moment I touched your arm to steady you. I felt it. The connection. The recognition. Everything my wolf had been searching for his entire life, standing right there in front of me covered in wood chips and terrified of being hit. But you walked away. I had to. His hands clenched at his sides. I was being hunted, Alara. Someone in my inner circle wanted me dead. If I'd claimed you as my mate, acknowledged the bond publicly, you would have become an instant target. They would have used you against me, hurt you to control me. I couldn't do that to you. Tears burned in my eyes. So you've been alone all this time. Hiding. Watching me mourn you while you were right there. Yes. The word was barely audible, and it's been the sweetest torture I've ever known. We stood there in the flickering candlelight, the truth settling between us like snow, beautiful and cold and transformative. My tiny cottage had never felt smaller. The space between us charged with 3 months of longing and 6 months of connection neither of us had been able to act on. What happens now? I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. You can't stay hidden forever. And I can't. I can't keep mourning a ghost who's standing in my kitchen. A hint of a smile touched his lips, the first I'd seen, and it transformed his face from haunted to heartbreaking. I've missed your directness. You spoke to my grave the same way. No pretense, no careful political language. Just truth. I have nothing to lose by being honest, I said. No reputation to protect, no status to maintain. It's a freedom that comes with being invisible. You're not invisible to me. He took a step closer, then seemed to catch himself, maintaining the distance between us like it physically pained him, and that's the problem. Alara, if anyone discovers what you mean to me, what we are to each other, I'll be in danger. You've said. I crossed my arms, partly for warmth and partly to keep myself from reaching for him, but I'm already in danger now, aren't I? You've revealed yourself to me, the traitors you're hunting. If they find out you're alive, they'll wonder who else knows. They'll investigate everyone you've had contact with. His expression darkened, which is why I shouldn't have come here. Shouldn't have let you see my face. I put you at risk because I was selfish. Because I couldn't stand another day of watching you hurt and knowing I was the cause. You didn't make me grieve, I said softly. I chose to. Every morning, I chose to go to that cemetery, to bring flowers, to speak to you. That was my decision. A decision based on a lie? No. I shook my head firmly, based on a truth. You were kind to me when no one else was. That happened. That was real. Everything I felt about that moment, everything I said at your grave, it was all real, whether you were dead or alive. He made a sound low in his throat, and I realized his control was slipping. I could see it in the tension of his shoulders, the way his hands kept clenching and unclenching, the storm building in his eyes. The mate bond pulled at both of us, demanding acknowledgement, demanding touch, demanding we close this unbearable distance. "You should be angry with me," he said roughly. "You should throw me out, tell me to never come back. I lied to you. I let you suffer. I am angry," I admitted. Furious, actually. But I'm also... I trailed off, searching for words adequate to describe the chaos inside me. I'm relieved you're alive. I'm confused about what this means. I'm terrified of what comes next, and I'm fighting every instinct in my body that's screaming at me to touch you. The last confession slipped out before I could stop it, and I saw the impact it had on him. His eyes flashed gold, his wolf rising to the surface, and he gripped the back of my chair so hard the wood creaked. "Don't say things like that," he warned, his voice dropping to a growl. "I'm barely holding on as it is." "How long?" I asked, taking a deliberate step toward him. Some reckless part of me wanted to push, to test the limits of his control. Maybe because I'd spent so long being invisible, being powerless, and now I had the ability to affect the most powerful man in the realm. "How long have you been denying the bond?" 6 months of hell, he ground out. 6 months of knowing my mate existed and not being able to claim her. Then 3 months of being dead and watching her mourn me. Do you have any idea what that's done to me? What it's still doing? Then why are you still standing over there? The words came out as a challenge. His eyes snapped to mine, burning with intensity. "Because if I touch you, I won't stop. And you deserve better than a king who can't even exist in daylight, who has nothing to offer you but danger and secrets, and a half-life in shadows." "What if I don't want better?" I countered. "What if I just want you?" The chair splintered under his grip. He crossed the space between us so fast I barely saw him move, stopping just inches away, close enough that I could feel the heat radiating from his body but still not touching. His chest heaved with harsh breaths, and I could see the war raging inside him written across every line of his face. "Ilara," he said, my name a warning and a plea. "You don't know what you're asking for, then tell me," I whispered, tilting my face up to his. "Tell me what I'm asking for." His hand lifted slowly, hovering near my cheek like he was afraid I might disappear if he actually made contact. "You're asking for a mate who's technically dead, who can't give you a proper claiming ceremony, can't introduce you to his pack as his queen, can't even be seen with you in public without risking both our lives." His fingers finally brushed against my skin, and the contact sent electricity racing through my entire body. My wolf howled in triumph. "You're asking for stolen moments in darkness," he continued, his voice rough with emotion. "Hidden meetings and constant fear of discovery. You're asking to love a ghost." "You're not a ghost," I said, leaning into his touch despite my trembling. "You're right here. Solid. Real. Alive. For how long?" The anguish in his voice made my heart crack. "Ilara, when I reveal myself, and I will have to eventually, the enemies I've been hunting will strike. There will be violence, possibly war, and anyone connected to me will be targeted first and hardest." "So you're saying I should walk away? Pretend this conversation never happened? Go back to mourning a lie?" "I'm saying you should run," he said bluntly, though his hand stayed gentle against my face. "As far and as fast as you can. Find a nice beta wolf in some distant pack who can give you a safe, normal life. Forget you ever met me." "And what about the bond?" I asked. "Can you just ignore it? Pretend it doesn't exist?" Pain flashed across his features. "I've been doing exactly that for 6 months. It's like living with a blade buried in my chest. I've gotten used to the constant agony. That's not living," I said softly. "That's just existing, surviving. Sometimes survival is all we get." I pulled back enough to look him fully in the eyes, letting him see every ounce of determination I possessed. "You told me once that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's just continuing when everything tells you to stop. Do you remember that?" His breath caught. You remember what I said? I remember everything about that day. Every word, every detail. And I've spent 6 months trying to live up to what you told me, continuing even when everything hurt. Even when giving up would have been easier. I placed my hand over his heart, feeling it thunder beneath my palm. Don't tell me to run now. Don't tell me to give up. Not when I finally found out what I was holding on for. He covered my hand with his, pressing it harder against his chest. You're going to be the death of me, you know that? You're already supposed to be dead, I pointed out. So really, I can only improve the situation. The laugh that escaped him was startled and genuine, breaking through some of the tension. How are you making jokes right now? Your entire world just turned upside down. My world turned upside down 6 months ago in a market square, I corrected. This is just a different angle on the same impossible situation. He shook his head slowly, but I could see the walls he'd built around himself beginning to crack. What am I supposed to do with you? I have some ideas, I said, then felt my face flush as his eyes darkened with understanding. Ilara, I'm not asking for forever right now, I interrupted quickly. I'm not asking you to claim me publicly or make me your queen, or any of the complicated things that would put us both in danger. I'm just asking. I had to pause, gathering courage. I'm asking you not to disappear again, not to leave me mourning at an empty grave while you hide in the shadows. If you have to stay dead for now, fine. But let me be part of it. Let me know you're alive. He studied my face for a long moment, and I could see him weighing the risks against his own desperate need for connection. Finally, slowly, he nodded. Once a week, he said. I'll come here after dark, when it's safe. We'll have a few hours together, but Ilara, you can't tell anyone. Not Margaret, not Thomas, not your closest friend. No one can know I'm alive except you and Rafe. I understand. And you have to promise me that if things get dangerous, if I tell you to run, you'll do it. No questions, no arguments. I wanted to protest that condition, but I could see how much he needed this promise, how the thought of me in danger was his breaking point. I promise. Some of the tension finally left his shoulders. He pulled me closer, carefully, like I was something precious that might shatter. I went willingly, fitting against him like we were made for this. My head tucked under his chin, his arms wrapped around me in a hold that was both protective and desperate. This is a terrible idea, he murmured into my hair. Probably the worst, I agreed, but I was smiling. We stood like that for a long time, just holding each other, letting the bond settle into something manageable instead of the screaming need it had been. I could feel his heart gradually slowing from its frantic pace, could feel my own wolf finally quiet, satisfied now that we were in our mate's arms. Tell me about the investigation, I said eventually. What have you learned? He tensed slightly, and I felt him considering whether to involve me in the dangerous details. But finally, he began to speak, his voice low and careful. 3 council members are definitely involved. Lord Brennan, Lady Victoria, and Councillor Hayes. They've been meeting in secret, moving large sums of money and communicating with wolves in the Shadowfang pack across the border. I knew those names. Everyone did. They were among the most powerful nobles in the realm, with vast territories and armies of loyal followers. But they're not the leaders, Demon continued. Someone else is orchestrating this, someone with access to information only my closest advisors should have. Someone who knew my security routes, my private schedules, my weaknesses. Someone you trusted, I said quietly. Yes. The word was bitter, which makes it so much worse. I've been racking my brain for months, trying to figure out who I let get close enough to betray me this thoroughly. A thought occurred to me, dangerous and probably presumptuous, but I voiced it anyway. What if you're looking at it wrong? What if it's not about who you trusted, but who trusted someone else? What if the real traitor isn't on your council at all, but someone who has access through other means? He pulled back to look at me, curiosity flickering in his eyes. What do you mean? Well, you said Lord Brennan and the others are involved. They have families, assistants, lovers, servants, dozens of people close to them who might overhear things, see documents, carry messages. What if your real enemy is someone using these council members as puppets? Someone who stays in the background while others take the risks? Demon stared at me for a long moment, and I could see his mind working, turning over this new angle. That would explain why we can't find a direct connection to my inner circle. We've been investigating the council members themselves, but if the real traitor is operating one level removed... It's just a thought, I said quickly. I don't know anything about politics or investigations. I'm probably wrong. No, he said slowly, a new intensity in his gaze. You might be exactly right, Alara. You may have just given us the breakthrough we've been searching for. Before I could respond, he kissed my forehead, a brief, gentle press of lips that nonetheless sent warmth flooding through me, and stepped back, reaching for his cloak. I need to go find Rafe, tell him about this new approach, but I'll come back. He checked the moon's position through my window. 3 nights from now? Same time? I nodded, trying not to show my disappointment that he was leaving already. He must have seen it anyway, because he returned to cup my face in both his hands, his thumbs stroking my cheeks with devastating tenderness. I know this isn't enough. I know you deserve so much more than stolen hours and secrets. But I swear to you, Alara, the moment it's safe, the moment I can reveal myself without putting you in mortal danger, I'm going to stand on the highest tower in the capital and claim you as my mate for the entire realm to hear. I'll hold you to that, I whispered. He smiled, a real, full smile that made him look younger, less haunted. And then he was gone, shifting into his massive silver wolf and disappearing into the night, leaving me alone in my cottage with a splintered chair and a heart that felt both shattered and whole for the first time in months. The next 3 days passed in a strange duality. On the surface, my life continued as it always had. I returned to work at the mill, endured Margaret's concerned looks and the whispered gossip of the other workers, walked through the settlement buying bread and vegetables from vendors who barely acknowledged my existence. I was still Alara, the invisible Omega, the girl who mourned a dead king with inexplicable devotion, but beneath that familiar surface, everything had transformed. I stopped going to the cemetery. The absence of my daily ritual sent ripples through the small group of people who'd noticed my routine. Old Thomas asked if I was finally healing. Margaret looked relieved, and I caught a few of the crueler pack members smirking like they'd won some unspoken contest. Let them think what they wanted. I had no need to mourn at an empty grave when I knew the truth beating in my chest like a second heart. Demon was alive. My mate was alive. And in 2 more nights he would return. I cleaned my cottage obsessively, fixed the splintered chair as best I could, and tried not to count the hours. My wolf was calmer than she'd been in months, purring with satisfaction at having finally connected with our mate, but also restless with anticipation for his return. On the second night, something changed. I was walking home from my evening shift when I felt eyes on me, not the indifferent glances I was used to, but focused attention that made my skin prickle with awareness. I turned casually, scanning the darkening streets, and caught a flash of movement in the alley between the baker's shop and the leather worker's stall. Someone was following me. My heart rate spiked, but I forced myself to keep walking at a normal pace. Demon had warned me that knowing the truth made me a target, but I'd half convinced myself he was being overly protective. Now, feeling that predatory gaze tracking my movement, I understood his fear. I took a deliberately indirect route home, weaving through the market square and down side streets, trying to see if my follower would reveal themselves. But whoever it was stayed carefully hidden, a shadow among shadows, and by the time I reached my cottage, I was almost running. I slammed the door behind me and threw the bolt, my hands shaking. Should I try to contact Demon? But I had no way to reach him. He'd given me no method of communication, probably for exactly this reason. If I was caught with some way to signal him, it would prove the connection between us. I was on my own until he returned tomorrow night. I barely slept, starting at every sound, my wolf on high alert. When dawn finally broke and nothing had happened, I almost convinced myself I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. But when I opened my door to head to work, I found something that made my blood run cold. A single black rose lay on my doorstep, its petals dark as midnight, its thorns gleaming like obsidian blades. White roses meant devotion, remembrance, purity. Black roses meant death. Someone knew. Someone was sending me a message. I looked around frantically, but the street was empty, the early morning mist hiding anything that might be lurking. I grabbed the rose with shaking hands and retreated inside, bolting the door again. This changed everything. I couldn't wait until tonight. I had to warn Demon somehow, but how? I had no idea where he was hiding. No way to contact Rafe. Nothing but my own growing panic and the certainty that whoever left this rose knew more than they should. The day crawled by in agony. I went to work because not going would be suspicious. But I jumped at every shadow, analyzed every glance from my co-workers, wondered if the person following me was someone I passed every day without noticing. Margaret asked twice if I was feeling well, and I lied through my teeth, claiming I hadn't slept well. By the time I returned home that evening, I was wound so tight, I thought I might shatter. Demon was waiting inside my cottage. I nearly collapsed with relief at the sight of him standing by my window, still cloaked but with his hood down, his face drawn with concern. He crossed to me immediately, his hands gripping my shoulders as he studied my face. "What happened?" he demanded. "I could feel your fear through the bond all day. It was driving me insane not knowing if you were safe." I pulled the black rose from my bag where I'd hidden it and held it up. His expression went from concerned to murderous in an instant. "When did this appear?" "This morning. On my doorstep." I told him quickly about being followed the night before, about the watching eyes and the sense of being hunted. "Someone knows, Demon. They know you've been here, or they suspect something about me, or they're trying to flush me out," he said grimly, taking the rose and examining it with the careful attention of someone well-versed in threats. "This is a message meant for me, delivered through you. They know I'm alive, or at least suspect it strongly enough to test the theory. How? We were so careful. Someone must have seen me coming or going, or noticed your change in behavior. You stopped visiting the cemetery right after I revealed myself." He cursed under his breath, a vicious sound. "I was careless. I put you in danger exactly like I feared." "What do we do?" I asked, fighting to keep my voice steady. He was silent for a long moment, and I could see the war happening behind his eyes. The king making strategic calculations while the mate wanted nothing more than to grab me and run. Finally, he met my gaze. And what I saw there made my stomach drop. "You have to leave. Tonight, I'll give you money, enough to get far away from here, start a new life somewhere safe." "No." The word came out flat and absolute. "Alara, this isn't a discussion. They've marked you as a target. The only way to keep you safe is to get you far away from me in this situation." "And what about the bond?" I demanded. "You think I can just run away and be fine? You said yourself it's been agony these past months. How am I supposed to survive being separated from you permanently when I've only just found you?" "You'll be alive," he said harshly. "That's all that matters. That's not living." My voice rose despite my efforts to control it. "And besides, running doesn't solve anything. If they suspect you're alive, if they know about me, they'll hunt me down wherever I go, at least here, with you. I have protection." "I can't protect you when I don't even officially exist. Then maybe it's time to change that." The words hung in the air between us, dangerous and electric. Demon stared at me like I'd suggested he set himself on fire. "You can't be serious. We don't have enough evidence yet. If I reveal myself now, the traitors will destroy everything we've worked for. They already know you're alive," I interrupted. "Or strongly suspect it. This rose proves that. So the question isn't whether to stay hidden. It's whether to keep playing defense or go on the attack." I saw the moment the idea took hold in his mind, saw the strategic possibilities beginning to unfold. He started pacing, his movements restless and predatory. If I revealed myself publicly, claimed resurrection or survival instead of faking death, the traitors would have to react immediately. They'd be forced to make moves without full preparation, might make mistakes in the rush. "And I could help," I said quickly. "They're watching me already. We could use that. Let them think I'm just a grieving Omega who doesn't know anything, while I actually gather information." "Absolutely not." He rounded on me, his eyes flashing gold. "I'm not using you as bait. I'm already bait." I shot back. "They already think I'm important enough to threaten. At least this way we control the situation instead of just reacting to it." We stared at each other, both breathing hard, the mate bond crackling between us with the intensity of our emotions. "I can't lose you," he said finally, his voice breaking on the words. "Not when I just got you back. Not when I've spent 6 months knowing you existed and not being able to—" He cut himself off, running both hands through his hair in frustration. I crossed to him, taking his face in my hands and forcing him to look at me. "Then trust me. Trust that I'm stronger than I look. Trust that maybe being invisible all these years taught me how to move through the world without being noticed, how to listen and observe without drawing attention. Trust that I can do this. You're asking me to risk everything that matters," he whispered. "I'm asking you to fight instead of hide, to be the king you're meant to be instead of a ghost haunting his own grave." I pulled his forehead down to rest against mine. "And I'm asking you to let me stand beside you when you do it. Not behind you, not hidden away for my own safety. Beside you." He shuddered, his arms coming around me, pulling me against him so tightly I could barely breathe. "You're going to be the death of me," he murmured into my hair, echoing his words from days before. "Or the making of you," I countered. He pulled back enough to look at me, and something in his expression had shifted. The haunted look was still there, but beneath it was determination, purpose, the Alpha King who had led his people through countless challenges. "If we do this," he said carefully, "we do it right. No half measures. I reveal myself at the full moon gathering in 3 days. It's the one time all the major families and council members are required to attend. Public, ceremonial, impossible to dismiss or cover up." My heart started racing. 3 days. "And my role? You keep doing exactly what you've been doing, working, living your quiet life, but you listen. You watch. The nobles and their families often visit the market, and servants gossip. You'd be amazed what people say in front of someone they consider beneath notice." He was right. I'd overheard countless conversations over the years simply because people forgot Omegas had ears. "What about us?" I asked quietly. "The bond." "When you reveal yourself, I claim you immediately," he said with absolute certainty. "In front of everyone. No more hiding, no more shame about choosing an Omega as my mate. Let them object. Let them protest. You'll be queen. And anyone who has a problem with that can challenge me directly." The fierceness in his voice made my wolf surge with pride and love. "They'll think you've lost your mind, coming back from the dead and immediately claiming a nobody as your mate. Let them think what they want." He cupped my face with such tenderness, it made my eyes burn. "I've spent 6 months dead and 3 months hiding. I'm done letting fear and politics dictate my life. I'm done pretending the bond doesn't exist. And I'm done acting like you're anything less than the most important person in my world." I kissed him then, unable to hold back any longer. It was clumsy and desperate and perfect, our first real kiss, and the bond sang between us like recognition and homecoming and promise all wrapped together. He made a sound low in his throat and deepened the kiss, his hands tangling in my hair, and for a few precious moments, there was nothing else. No traitors, no danger, no complicated politics, just us, finally, completely together. When we finally broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against mine again. 3 days? He repeated. "Can you be brave for 3 more days?" "I've been brave for 6 months," I said. "What's 3 more days?" The full moon gathering was held in the grand courtyard of the capital's main keep, a massive space that could hold thousands. I had never attended before. Omegas weren't forbidden, but we weren't exactly encouraged either, and I'd never had reason to subject myself to the stares and whispers. Tonight was different. I wore the best dress I owned, a simple blue affair that Margaret had helped me alter to fit better. My pale blonde hair was braided and pinned up, and I'd borrowed a shawl from one of my co-workers. I looked presentable if not impressive, just another face in the crowd. I positioned myself near the back, close to the servants' entrance, where I could observe without being observed. The courtyard was already packed with wolves from every major family, all dressed in their finest, all buzzing with excitement for the ceremonial run that would follow the moon's rise. Lord Brennan stood with a cluster of other nobles, his expression smug. Lady Victoria held court nearby, her laugh too loud, her gestures too expansive. Counselor Hayes lurked at the edge of the crowd, watching everything with calculating eyes. The traitors, all present, all confident, they had no idea what was coming. Rafe stood on the raised platform at the front of the courtyard, looking uncomfortable in his formal attire. He was Demon's Beta, his most trusted friend, and he'd been carrying the weight of the realm alone for 3 months. Tonight, that burden would finally lift. Wolves of the realm. Rafe's voice rang out over the crowd, and silence fell immediately. We gather tonight to honor the full moon, to run as our ancestors did, to remember those we've lost, and celebrate those who remain. A murmur of agreement rippled through the assembly. 3 months ago, we lost our king, Rafe continued, and I saw several wolves bow their heads in respect. Demon Silvercrest fell in battle, defending our borders, protecting our people. We mourned him. We buried him. We began the difficult process of moving forward. I watched the traitors carefully. Lord Brennan's expression was appropriately solemn, but I caught a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. Lady Victoria dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, the picture of grief. Counselor Hayes simply looked bored. But tonight, Rafe said, his voice strengthening, I have news that will shake the very foundations of what we believe. The crowd leaned forward as one, hungry for information. Our king did not fall in battle. Rafe paused, letting the words sink in. He was betrayed. Ambushed by those who should have protected him. Sold out by traitors within our own ranks. But he survived. Chaos erupted. Shouts of disbelief, anger, confusion. Lord Brennan went pale. Lady Victoria's handkerchief fell from her nerveless fingers. Counselor Hayes straightened like someone had shoved a rod down his spine. I don't believe it, someone shouted. Prove it, another voice demanded. Rafe smiled, sharp and satisfied. As you wish. The crowd parted, some wolves stumbling over themselves to get out of the way, as a massive silver-gray wolf padded through the courtyard. He was enormous, radiating power and authority that made every wolf present instinctively want to submit. He walked with the confident grace of a born predator, his storm-gray eyes scanning the assembly with the kind of intelligence that marked him as far more than animal. He reached the platform and shifted, the transformation flowing like water, until Demon Silvercrest stood before his people in human form, very much alive, very much their king. The silence was deafening. Then someone screamed, a high, joyful sound, and suddenly the entire courtyard erupted in celebration. Wolves shifted and howled, people shouted his name. The noise was overwhelming and chaotic and beautiful. Through it all, Demon's eyes found mine across the crowd, holding my gaze with an intensity that made my breath catch. My people, he said, his voice cutting through the noise like a blade. I apologize for the deception. It was necessary to expose those who would destroy us from within, and tonight, with all of you as witnesses, I will name the traitors who tried to end my life and take control of our realm. Lord Brennan bolted. He shifted mid-run, his wolf form scrambling for the exit, but Demon's loyal guards were ready. They caught him before he made it 10 feet, forcing him back into human form and binding him with silver chains that burned against his skin. Lady Victoria tried to play innocent, but when Demon began listing her crimes, specific dates, amounts of money, names of her co-conspirators, her facade crumbled. She lunged for a hidden weapon and was subdued almost immediately. Counselor Hayes didn't run. He simply stood there, smiling coldly, and said, You think you've won? This was never about just the 3 of us. We're part of something much larger, and killing us won't stop what's coming. I know, Demon said calmly. That's why I'm not going to kill you. I'm going to let you live long enough to name everyone else involved, every contact, every plan. And then I'm going to dismantle your entire operation piece by piece. Hayes's smile faltered. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of arrests and revelations. Demon had spent 3 months gathering evidence, and now it all came pouring out. Documents, testimonies, proof that couldn't be denied. The conspiracy ran deeper than anyone had suspected, touching families and territories across the realm. But with the ringleaders exposed, the whole structure began to collapse. Through it all, I stayed in my corner, watching, until finally the immediate chaos settled and Demon turned to address his people again. "There's one more matter I need to address tonight," he said, and his eyes found mine once more. "Something personal." My heart stopped as he descended from the platform and began walking directly toward me. The crowd parted around him, hundreds of eyes turning to follow his path, to see where the Lycan king was headed. He stopped in front of me, this massive, powerful alpha, and very deliberately dropped to one knee. The courtyard went utterly silent. "Ilara," he said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "When I was dead, you mourned me. When I was lost, you found me. When I was hiding, you gave me reason to step into the light. You are my mate, chosen by fate and claimed by my heart. And I ask you now, in front of all our people, to stand beside me. Not as a subject, not as an omega to be pitied, but as my queen, my equal, my partner in all things." Tears streamed down my face as I looked at him kneeling before me, offering me everything I'd never dared dream of having. "Yes," I whispered, then louder, stronger. "Yes." He rose and pulled me into his arms, kissing me in front of the entire assembly, marking me with his scent, claiming me publicly and irrevocably as his. The bond blazed between us, finally fully acknowledged, finally complete, and my wolf sang with joy. When we finally broke apart, the courtyard erupted in cheers. Not everyone was happy. I could see disapproval on some faces, shock on others, but the majority were celebrating, caught up in the romance and drama of their returned king claiming his unlikely queen. Demon kept me tucked against his side as he addressed the remaining business of the evening, his hand never leaving my waist, his touch constant and grounding. This was real. This was happening. I was standing beside the Lycan king as his acknowledged mate, and the world hadn't ended. It had, in fact, just begun. 6 months later, I stood on the balcony of the royal chambers, watching the sunrise paint the capital in shades of gold and rose. The city had changed so much in half a year. The traitors' conspiracy had been completely dismantled. New alliances had been forged, and reforms had been implemented that gave omegas and lower-ranking wolves more voice in governance. Strong arms wrapped around me from behind, and I leaned back into Demon's warmth. "You're up early," he murmured against my ear. "Couldn't sleep. Too much excitement about today." Today marked the official anniversary celebration of Demon's return and our mating. The entire realm would gather to celebrate, and I still sometimes couldn't believe this was my life, that I was queen, that I stood beside Demon not as a dream, but as reality. "Nervous?" he asked, pressing a kiss to my temple. "Terrified," I admitted, but in a good way. He turned me in his arms, studying my face with those storm-gray eyes that still made my heart race. "You know, old Thomas told me something interesting yesterday. He said you used to buy white roses from him every few days, that you were his most faithful customer." I felt my cheeks heat. I may have mentioned where I was taking them. "He also said you never missed a day, not once in 3 months. Rain, snow, illness, you were there." His expression softened into something tender. "You loved me when I was dead. You saw value in me when I was nothing but a name on a headstone. How did I get so lucky?" "I think I'm the lucky one," I said, reaching up to cup his face. "I was invisible, and you saw me. I was nobody, and you made me everything. You were always everything," he corrected. "I just made sure the world knew it too." From inside our chambers, Rafe's voice called out, "Hate to interrupt, but we have about 1,000 things to do before tonight's celebration, and you two are already behind schedule." Demon groaned, but didn't let me go. "He's worse than any servant. He's your beta, and he's right," I said, laughing. "Come on, Your Majesty. We have a realm to run." "After you, Your Majesty," he countered, bowing dramatically. As we headed inside together, his hand in mine, I caught my reflection in the polished mirror on the wall. The pale blonde omega who used to cry at a cemetery every morning was gone. In her place stood a queen, still with the same hair, the same face, but transformed by love and purpose and the knowledge that she mattered. I thought about that conversation at the grave, when Demon had asked what I would tell him if he could hear me. I'd said his kindness saved my life, that knowing him existed made the world worth staying in. I'd been right, but I'd also been wrong. It wasn't just his kindness that saved me. It was learning that I had the strength to save myself, the courage to stand beside him instead of behind him, the wisdom to know that being seen wasn't a gift someone else gave you. It was a truth you claimed for yourself, and I'd claimed it, claimed my place, my voice, my value. Claimed my king, who had once claimed me. The story that began with mourning at a grave had transformed into a life more beautiful than any fairy tale, more real than any dream. And as I walked beside Demon toward whatever challenges the day would bring, I knew with absolute certainty that this, all of this, was exactly where I was meant to be. Not invisible, not forgotten, not lost, found, claimed, loved, finally, completely, home.